Hey, what's up everyone? Livid here today, and I just want to have a casual conversation with you all about the kind of Temtem that I personally brought to Kisiwa, and also ones to kind of be on the lookout for in Kisiwa. We've seen a few people ask, what kind of things that we look for here and how we kind of analyze the situation, so I kind of just wanted to bring that to you today. So nothing crazy, but just want to give you the reasoning behind my picks, how I utilize them on my team, what kind of strengths they have, and reasons I'd pick up some of the ones here in Kisiwa just to have regardless. So let's just jump right into it, right? So in terms of the Temtem that I'd bring to Kisiwa, the first main one that I really started with here, I would say is Banshi. Banshi's really strong. She's got a really strong kit. And Mental All Around is a solid answer for Kisiwa to any neutral or melee Temtem. Things that you're going to find in abundance here, right? Mental Temtem are usually really fast and they're really hard hitting, meaning you'll likely solve your problem before it even has a chance to become one. And also with Banshi, it's a really heavy special attacker, right? And that's the kind of the case for most mental types. So having that, in addition to it being a wind type with a really solid kit, it gives you some really effective coverage against toxic types. And we know that there's a few of these that pop up in the story, right? And you get some cool moves, especially if you breed through, through the breeding chain. You get things like Beta Burst, which, it's just we got Psy Surge, which is pretty good because it only costs 15 stamina, but it's really slow in priority. Beta Burst has a higher priority, meaning you'll more oftentimes go faster, and it still hits, for that 100 damage mark. And when you amp the special attack, it does a pretty good amount of damage, right? So and then you just have things like Wind Burst or Tornado to really, swap in if you want, depending on the situation. But, and it also as a support Temtem, Turbo Choreography helps you make sure that your entire team is just sped up and has the advantage. So all around, it's a really good Temtem. Now, the other one that I'd recommend in this kind of same vein in the mental type would be Kinu. And Kinu's really good with both traits. Like both Benefactor and Protector are really solid, right? Because Benefactor lets you stay on the field and just keeps healing your Temtem when they take hits, which is, we'll get into a little bit later why that's good and with kind of the team comp that I have, right? But Protector is also really good because every time you swap it in, you up your special defense and defense, which is really good if you're trying to just like survive and make certain Temtem that are weak to a lot of kind of techniques just more bulky on the field, right? So they stick around longer and you are more likely to succeed. So in addition to this, I kind of like spec my Kinu often as like a full support. If you look here, there's no real offensive techniques. It's all about supporting, but you have the option to swap in things like, Sharp Leaf or Beta Burst to give yourself the typing to tackle these kind of things in the game, right? So if you're tackling like a mental Temtem, or not a mental Temtem, if you're tackling like a melee or a neutral, you have the ability to swap these in to really go after them, or even ground and water types. You could do this with your kit, right? But the reason I go for more of a full support kit is it just really benefits the playstyle of Kinu. You kind of just want to have it in there to address a lot of things. You have Hypnosis to shut down Temtem in a match to give you more control. Say something's really going unfavorably, just putting them to sleep gives you that advantage to adjust your team or make buffs and stuff like that you might need. Then we have things like Lifeful Sap and Revitalize. Lifeful Sap will let you heal yourself, but the cool thing about it is when you swap it out and it's in waiting on your bench, you have the ability, it heals each turn that it's going. So while this is procced, it's just really good. And then when you have things like Revitalize, it just gives you the ability to burst heal yourself or your team or your ally on the field, which is just really good. And then there's a common theme here with the Temtem that I like is I like ones that have Turbo Choreography able to be learned, because it just gives you more chances to get your team sped up to always have the advantage. So that's just kind of the way that, that's the reason I like Kinu. Kinu's just really solid in the competitive scene, and more often than not, you'll see it banned out a lot of the time because it's so strong. So yeah, that's kind of my reasoning there. My other choice here that I brought to Kisiwa was Saipat. And Saipat is an absolutely amazing Temtem for Kisiwa and just in general, especially if you breed in the egg moves that we have here, right? So you get Toxic Ink from Calibus and you get Ice Shuriken from Oshiara. It's a little bit of a challenging thing because Oshiara is kind of a pain to farm. And then with Calibus, you have to level a Kalazoo all the way up to evolve it and then breed it. But if you're not going for perfect Temtem, it's not that big of a deal. Perfects tend to be kind of a problem sometimes. But these are just really overall good moves. If you get it with Toxic Affinity, it's really good because it gives you the synergy, the stab effect with toxic techniques. So they get a type damage boost, which is really good. So effectively it turns your Saipat into being water melee, from being water melee to water melee toxic, which is really good, but it doesn't receive the negatives from being a toxic. You know what I mean? So it doesn't get really weak to wind techniques, which is good. Toxic Ink is really good against any nature and water types, but also gives you a solid damage and chip damage on those that don't resist it. So it's just all around a good move to hit things when you don't really have an answer, right? Another good move on there, the Ice Shuriken. It's just a lower damage, cheaper stamina cost water move than Ice Stalactite. You can get away with that, but you often don't need to, and saving stamina is kind of key in a lot of battles, right? So, you know, even though Ice Stalactite does hit harder at 82 damage, Ice Shuriken hits for 60, it's not that much lower, and you save a considerable amount of stamina. You save like 8 stamina, which is, you know, almost the equivalent of having another move. So that's really overall good. And then the other thing that I'd really also say about Saipat is Nichosai. You know, this is like a signature move of Saipat, and it is really good. It's extremely fast. It's a melee technique. You get your stab bonus, and on top of it, it's a 135 base damage attack that has really high priority already, right? So this thing alone absolutely bullies any Earth Temtem that you come across, which with Kisiwa, you have a ton of Earth Temtem that are coming at you. So this thing all around just clears most of them, and it has, you know, just both kits, both water and melee tackle the Earth kit that is, you know, present in Kisiwa. And then last, you get Ninja Jutsu, which is extremely fast. It's often nothing really goes ahead of it unless something is using Ninja Jutsu itself. And it just does 130 damage. It's kind of expensive on stamina, about half your stamina pool. But if you just don't have a solution to a Temtem that's on the field, a normal technique with, you know, the baked in fact that it's a physical attack, and Saipat already has a really high physical attack stat, it just can answer most things that come at it on the field, right? So my next Temtem that I'd kind of recommend for Kisiwa and just all around is a great Temtem to have is Forerunned. And unfortunately, this Temtem does get banned out a lot in competitive because it's so good. It's actually probably one of the most banned Temtem that I see. Anytime I have it on my team or it's on an enemy team, it's always the first ban for the most part. But in PvE, this thing is a monster because you get to use it 100% of the time. You don't have that chance for it to be banned out, right? Anaerobic is probably my favorite trait on it. You know, whenever you're attacking with a toxic technique, you lower your special attack, but you also up your special defense. And the reason that's significant is most attacks that come at it that want to deal with a wind or toxic type is they're going to come at you with special attacks. And so if you get off a few of these abilities, it's just going to be so beefy because it already has 133 special defense that it becomes so beefy, it's so hard to remove off the field. And all of its moves that are really good are physical attacks, and it has a really high physical attack stat. So you really don't care if your special attack goes lower. So you can see how that it just all around really synergizes well with this Temtem. And the other cool thing about this is it gives you super strong coverage against any water or toxic Temtem that kind of creep up on you. It's got a really fast moving wind kit with hyperkinetic strike, and how we mentioned earlier that we have things like turbo choreography to speed up. The faster this Temtem is, the more damage it does. So it just has a really good synergy with it, right? And especially if you get things like Feather Gatling, now you do have to breathe this into it, but it's a really strong, hard-hitting physical attack wind move, right? It's really good. And then the other cool thing that it has is Noxious Bomb. You can teach Noxious Bomb to it with, you know, most other toxic Temtem. But Noxious Bomb, it's another physical attack. So this thing really takes advantage of its attack stat. It's got pretty great speed. It's got the toxic stab. This thing just all around is an absolute monster, and it can clutch out most situations that you need to address this typing, right? Another Temtem that I'd kind of recommend is Surnif. I don't see a lot of people using it, but it's personally one of my favorites. It's a really bulky Temtem, right? It just all around excels as a wall for your team, especially in this update. Nearly everything that you fight comes at you with physical techniques. And if you have the trait that I have here, Callosity, anytime that you're attacked with a physical technique, you up your defense, which, you know, if you're getting hit with physical techniques and you're increasing your defense even more every time, they're just doing less and less and less damage. So you see where I'm going with this. It's just really good as a wall to really stall out things that you need to find an answer to, right? Now you get Water Cutting Lily as like its kind of base, one of the base moves, and it hits really hard, right? If you have Water Synergy on the field. And you know, you might have Water Synergy on the field because of this update with having a lot of Earth Temtem, but if you don't, you can get things like Frond Whip, right? And if you get, you do have to breed with a Typhoon to get Frond Whip, but it just hits really hard. Now, Water Cutting Lily does have the benefit of being, you know, a 3 priority move, and it does go way faster. But Frond Whip hits extremely hard, and if you've already bulked yourself up, you really don't care if you're going last in a turn. It just hits super hard. So that's kind of the Temtem that I'd really recommend here, and I tend to, because you get a lot of defense already through its trait, I kind of just max its attack, so it just really chunks really hard. And then kind of the other, the last kind of Temtem that I'd recommend is either Smazy or Machook. Now, the reason, you know, I don't have Smazy here is because a lot of people don't have access to Smazy yet, like able to, you know, find it in the wild, right? If you chose in the beginning, great, use it. It's a fantastic Temtem. But if you don't have Smazy, Machook is one that I would highly recommend. Now, the reason for this is because digital and mental Temtem barely exist in Kisiwa. So having this one here on the field, it just kind of lets you run away with it, right? Having the melee ability to kind of chip away at any Earth Temtem, right? It also gets half reduction from other melee. So if they're a melee ground type, you're going to chunk them versus they don't do very much to you, right? It's also it's an extremely bulky, it's very fast. It could be both a support and offensive Temtem. And getting something like the Parrier trait on Machook is really good, because any damage you take from physical techniques is reduced by 30%. So it makes your 1v1s against other melee Temtem in this update, or even in competitive, you trade much better, right? It can also learn moves like Turbo Choreography, as I've mentioned, you know, countless times before. So it synergizes really well with other Temtems, such as the Forerunned I mentioned earlier, right? If you have Machook and Forerunned on the field together, their kits are like super synergistic, and everything just complements off of one each other. So it's a really good team combo to have in this update, right? You also get things like Urushiol, and while it doesn't hit that hard in its base kind of state, if you again pair it with something like Forerunned, you can hit something and it will have 4 turns of poison damage, which is insane, right? You can have something that you're not really effective at getting off the field and kind of deplete a little over half of its health just from poison chip damage over the course of 4 turns. And if you have something like your Cerny or your Forerunned on the field that's just soaking up damage and not really leaving, more often than not, you're going to blow anything up off the field and just have a good time, right? It also has, you know, Uppercut and the Perfect Jab. They're great low cost, hard hitting turn 1 melee techniques. So this all around just a fantastic Temtem, right? So the other thing that I kind of just wanted to go over is what kind of Temtem are good to look for and just be on the hunt for this update. And the first one that I'd want to focus on probably is Hocus and Pocus, right? I'm not going to go super in depth into these just because we have a video on Hocus and Pocus already, so you can look at that. You can get all the breakdown just if you want to know about that. But just know that Hocus and Pocus are a very, very strong special attacker. They're really fast, they have a really solid kit overall, and I would just recommend 100% picking one of these up just to have it, if not for competitive, just to go forward when you were getting into things like Arbory down the line, when we're going to have to be fighting some melee Temtem. This thing will be a absolute killer against that, right? Another Temtem that I would really recommend picking up is Drakash. And it's the evolution of Pico or Pico. I don't know how people want to pronounce it, but it's a really solid Temtem. I don't personally have one yet because I've been trying to work on the breeding line to get them, but it's one that I had my eyes on for a while now. We already kind of have an Earth and Fire Temtem in the form of Volcrane, but that's more of a physical attacker, right? Drakash is a special attacker, and it's even got a signature move called Hellfire, and it's super hard hitting team wide. It does a full, across the board, hits both Temtem on the team with a special attack. And I think it does like 85 damage or so, but if you get it in synergy with another Fire Temtem, it hits for 100 damage and burns them. It's just really good. Even though I've never been a fan of Earth Fire combos for the most part, because it's, you know, that 4-time weakness to water and you just become useless against that type when it's on the field, it's still, in my opinion, a better choice than Volcrane because it's got a super high speed. I wouldn't say super high speed. It's like above average speed, right? It's really good. And it's got extremely high special attack. So it's definitely one to watch out for because there's a lot of Temtem that don't really buff their special defense. It's more about the defense, right? So if you have a high special attack, you're going to chip way harder. Another Temtem that I'm also working on obtaining, because I don't have one yet, but I think it's one to really be on the lookout for, is Moo Flank. Now, don't let Goaty fool you. This thing evolves into probably the best neutral Temtem in the game so far. It's got an amazing trait. You can't really see them here, but one of the best traits to pick is Hurrywart. It lowers all the move holds on this Temtem by 1 when it just enters the battlefield. So being able to get off stronger moves quicker than your opponent should be a pretty obvious strength here, and it just makes it, you know, a monster to come in because it jumps in and you're just like, oh man, I really have to now worry about this Temtem on the field. It also has an all-around above average stat spread, and it's pretty decently fast, especially if you combine it with things again like Turbo Choreography. This thing's going to be most of the time hitting faster than your opponent. It also is one of only 2 Temtem, the other being Ruler, which we have a guide on that you can go look at, that has the move Execution. A move that when you use it, if you hit a target with it, right, doesn't really have that much damage to it. It's like 50 base damage, but if you cause its health to drop below 40%, it just instantly kills it. Just straight up deletes it off the field. And I've had it happen to me in competitive already, and I completely was unaware that it was going to come at me when I was first fighting these things. And yes, it's really as strong as it sounds. So it's definitely a Temtem that I look at and I would definitely pick up. And, you know, if you don't want to go through the trouble of breeding a perfect one, you could probably buy one on the market. They're not that expensive. They're really good. And probably the last Temtem that I'd really highlight here from this whole, you know, update is Volphy. Volphy is probably the star of the show, in my opinion. While this thing is adorable, it's an absolute unit of a Temtem. The only typing that you really have to worry about with this, and I think it's completely nuts that this is the case, is melee. Nothing else does 2x damage to it or above that, right? Just melee. It's kind of crazy, right? Meaning that as an earth type, you can sit on the field against a water type and bully it. Pretty nuts. It has extremely high special defense and well above average special attack, even pushing into the high range of special attack, right? It has a special technique that's exclusive to Volphy, and it's called Plague, and I'm sure you see it whenever you see it in the wild. This is the thing that it always leads with right away. It's a 100 damage, no hold special technique that also exhausts their target for a turn. Now, if you get this off first every time, even in a competitive match, they're going to be using 50% more stamina every single turn. It's just really good, right? It also gets access to Dust Vortex as like a base ability. It's 131 damage Earth special attack. So I don't think I need to tell you how good that is, because it's pretty good priority. It hits really hard and it really capitalizes to the strength of Volphy's special attack. Just really good. And so the last thing I'd say about this Temtem and why it's really good, especially if you're just going through the story in a PvE sense, is that when you get to the Earth Shrine, if you have no Earth Temp to tackle this, honestly, go capture 6 Volphys. You'll clear it and have absolutely no problem. It's kind of ridiculous that you could just kind of catch 6 of them in the wild and just go through a piece of content without having to have any prior preparation, but goes to show how good of a Temtem it is, right? Now, are these all the good Temtem that are in Kisiwa? No. There are a lot of others that work really well given the right team conditions, but these are just personally ones that I think are major outliers and worth investing in. And just having them in reserve when you might need them, right? So, but I think that about does it for me today, about, you know, talking about all this stuff with you guys today. I could probably go on for hours, honestly, talking about this stuff. But if you like this analysis and want to give this video a like and strike up a conversation with others in the comment section, I'd appreciate it. You know, I enjoy hearing other people's takes on what Temtem they find incredibly valuable and strong, especially if it's in the off-meta pool. Because who knows, we might find some crazy new meta strat while doing so just by having the discussion, and that's the best way to really form, you know, a nice tight community that really talks about these sort of things. So, Anyway, guys, from everyone here at Legion Gaming, just want to say thanks for watching and play on.